Hello. A few years ago, I wanted to use a troll in one of my D&D sessions, but the base troll stats weren't very exciting to me. I looked around at some of the other troll variations since they can have different mutations, but none of them were really what I was after, even though there are some pretty cool variations. So I knew I was gonna have to put on my big boy pants and make the monster that I wanted to see. And that's what I did. Though, really, all I did was take some parts from one monster, add it to another, and beef it up a little. So this video is going to cover what I like to call the Basilisk Troll. But first, let me preface this with a few things. I ran this from my party of 3 level 6 characters. Everything was balanced around them. If you see something in the video and think,
"That's not enough damage,"
or
"That's too much health,"
please feel free to modify this to fit the needs of your game. If you tweak some numbers, you could easily adjust this to be a few levels higher or lower for what you need. So with that out of the way, let's go over the encounters that lead up to the Basilisk Troll. I'll skip over the plot and context of all of this and just focus on the mechanics. Before the party could fight the Basilisk Troll, they had to find it first. The way this started was with the party discovering the remains of a small camp where some kind of struggle had ensued. They found some torn off limbs and chunks of stone scattered around the camp. But more importantly, they found a trail that the mystery beast left behind. I didn't want the party to just do a couple survival checks and be done with it. That seemed kind of boring to me. And at the time, I had just recently watched Matt Colville's video on skill challenges. So I thought I'd give that a shot and see how it worked in my game. And as per usual with Matt's advice, it worked great. I'll put a link to that video down in the description, or the doobly-doo, as Matt would say, and I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it, along with all of his other videos. Matt gives really insightful advice, and I've learned a lot from him over the years. Anyways, this is how I ran the tracking challenge, with some slight variation from the way Matt does in the video. The party had to make skill checks to follow the beast back to its lair. They could use any skill they want in order to achieve this goal, provided it's appropriate to the encounter and makes sense. As a group, they had to get 5 successes before getting 3 failures. So each player picked a skill and described how their character used that skill to get them closer to the beast's lair. Some examples would be perception, to look for a faster route to follow, or nature, to determine what path a creature might take, or maybe athletics, to climb a tree to get a better view of where they're headed. Stuff like that. Once someone used a skill, they couldn't use that same skill again, but someone else could. Players could assist someone with a check and give them advantage, as long as the character trying to help had proficiency with that skill. Though that counted as an attempt for both characters, since that's basically both characters doing the skill. I also allowed players to use a spell or ability to count as an automatic success, as long as it's appropriate to tracking the beast. The reason for the automatic success was because they were burning a resource for that, so I figured it was an even trade. I started the skill checks with a DC of 12. Sometimes when I run these, I like to increase the DC by 1 after every roll to crank up the difficulty and add some tension. This was a few years ago, so my memory of it is a bit hazy, but I don't think I did the DC increase that time, since they had to get a couple more successes than failures. The difficulty was in the amount of attempts, rather than having to roll high a few times. Think of it like a marathon versus a sprint. One's about endurance, and the other one is about doing your absolute best for a short burst of time. The party found their way to the beast's lair, which was a cave by a river. They dropped down into the cave and began the second encounter. They found themselves in a cave that was dimly lit by a bunch of these glowing bioluminescent mushrooms scattered all around the floor and walls. It was honestly a peaceful sight, but unfortunately, the party's enjoyment of the cave's natural beauty was cut short when they walked too close to some mushrooms that started screaming and spewing poisonous gas. Also, there was a weird snail. Here's how I ran this encounter. I designed the mushrooms, so I'll show that stat block in a moment, but I also used a flail snail. I'm not entirely sure what the copyright laws are for showing content from supplemental books, so I'm not going to show the flail snail's stat block. It's from Volo's Guide to Monsters if you want to look it up though. Anyways, The basic gist of what it does is that it's a big snail that loses its tentacles as it takes more damage, and it's resistant to magic and can even reflect spells back to the caster. Also, it can stun people with pretty lights. The Shrieker Shrooms, on the other hand, are these big purplish mushrooms that, in unison, scream and release hallucinogenic gas when you get too close. I won't list out everything they do, but please feel free to pause the video and read them if you want. If the player characters fail their save against the gas, then they'll be subjected to effects like the floor being woozy and wobbly so it becomes difficult terrain, running as fast as they can in a random direction, or hallucinating a big monster swooping down to gobble them up. I gave the shrooms an initiative of 20 to kind of act as a layer action, but with the caveat that they're technically creatures and have health, so they can be killed. The idea of this encounter is to have the flail snail be roughly in the center of the cave doing its snail stuff, while the Shrieker Shrooms are scattered around the map, making the player characters have weird hallucinations. When I ran this, I put 5 shrooms around the map, so the party had to kill all 5 to get the hallucinations to stop. This wasn't really meant to be a difficult encounter, but instead to put the party in a weird situation and see how they deal with the effects. And also to burn some resources before the troll fight. Please note that on the stat block, it mentions that a creature can only be affected by 1 shroom's poison each round, meaning when they roll a save, whether they succeed or fail, they don't have to roll for the other 4 shrooms each round. And as for the map, you don't have to use this specific one you're seeing right now. Any cave-like map should work as long as it's not too much bigger. You want it to be small enough so that the poison gas can cover most of the cave, since every shroom has a poison range of 60 feet. If you want to adjust the difficulty, one way would be to add or subtract the amount of Shrieker Shrooms around the map. If you want to make it harder, you could also add another flail snail. Regardless, the shrieking mushrooms will essentially be an alarm system for the troll, so it can have some time to set up an ambush. As the party makes their way further into the cave system, they'll discover another room. This one doesn't have the glowing mushrooms like the last one, so it's going to be pretty dark. The party will find a bunch of statues scattered around. Some of them appear to be depicting people in various poses of terror, while others seem to be of wildlife. Strangely, some of the statues will appear to have bite marks in them. In my game, the troll was waiting for the party and dropped down onto them from the ceiling when they got close enough. So here's how I ran the Basilisk Troll. Normally, I try to avoid single enemy fights if I can help it. Even if the monster is very strong, the action economy in 5th edition D&D will usually favor the party in a situation like that, just because they have more opportunities to do things. However, giving a monster legendary actions and resistances can help even things out. So that's what I did. But first, let's go over what makes the Basilisk Troll a Basilisk Troll. As you can probably guess, it's basically just a troll with the petrifying gaze ability from a basilisk, with some slight modification. I like monster mechanics that the players can interact with. With the petrification, if the player characters failed 2 saves in a row, then that's it. They're a piece of art now. There isn't much interaction with that, so I gave them the option of having another party member shake them out of the pre-petrification, because I think it can encourage good teamwork and positioning. And also, the party was only level 6, so they didn't really have the tools available to deal with one of them being petrified. For the legendary actions, I kept them relatively simple just because the petrifying gaze mechanic was already a lot to deal with. The troll can have some extra movement, or an attack, or it can throw a statue to knock someone prone. That can be a nasty combo to hit a character with that, and then go in for the multi-attack while they're prone. I like the idea of the troll having to be beside a statue to throw it because, for starters, it just makes sense logistically, but it also encourages the troll to move around the map and reposition. Also, the party can use the statues for partial cover as well. Personally, I really enjoyed having a mechanic that both the party and the boss could play around with. It made for a pretty interesting dynamic. If you want to increase the difficulty of the fight, here are some ways you could do that, though you don't have to do all of these at once, unless you want to. Increase the troll's strength from 18 to 20. Give it another legendary resistance. Give it some more health or more attacks. That kind of stuff. If you want to make the Petrifying Gaze ability a little more deadly, I have some ideas for that as well. So obviously the Basilisk Troll's ability is based on the basilisk, but there are a few other creatures with that ability. The Medusa has almost the exact same thing, but with the added effect of, if the saving throw fails by 5 or more, the creature is instantly petrified. That kind of fail by X mechanic is something you don't see very often, and I kind of wish effects like that, either positive or negative, were more common. Another idea I had for the Petrifying Gaze that I almost went with was having the victim creature basically be under the effects of the slow spell after they fail the first of the 2 petrification saves. That was kind of a mouthful, so let me explain it with a simple order of events. A creature looks into the Basilisk Troll's eyes. Then, they have to make a Constitution saving throw or they start turning to stone. If they fail that first roll, then they're basically under the effects of the slow spell as their skin starts slowly turning to stone. Then, at the end of their next turn, they have to roll another Constitution saving throw, and if they fail that, they get completely turned to stone. The reason I didn't go with that from my game was because it was kind of complex and a lot to track, but I do still think it's a fun idea. So that's it. That's the Basilisk Troll and how I ran it. Oh, and one more thing. Do you remember earlier when I said some of the statues had bite marks? That's because the troll will unpetrify someone when it gets hungry, take a bite out of them, and then repetrify them until it gets hungry again. I'm gonna go now and let you think about that. Thanks for watching.